So if you want to find out the roles and responsibilities of the system, there's some information in Chapter 7 and 8 that I refer to in AG's Autism Manual for BC. You can often ask in the school district, it's interesting in British Columbia, it's very difficult to get hold of organizational charts. I love organizational charts. I often find them very difficult to access. But you know, we do have at ACT some organizational charts, especially for education. And you can ask for job descriptions, like what is someone's job with respect to my child? So from BC School Act regulations, you know, here's sort of an overview of what the principal is actually supervising all teaching and learning activities at the school. You might not see him in every classroom, and he's not at every IEP meeting, but ultimately he is responsible. And he's responsible for, or she's responsible, most often, for supervising student evaluation, assessment, reporting to parents, maintenance of records. So the principal has a lot of authority and responsibility. And finding, you know, people often ask me, what's the best school for my child to attend? I often say, go and interview the principal and find out how much longer he or she is intending to be at that school. Because often it's the principal that sets the tone for the school, you know, that makes the school a place that really is warmly inclusive. Because the school policy is supposed to be the same all the way across the province. But how the rubber hits the road is often informed by the principal's attitude. And I was very fortunate throughout my son's elementary school in having some just terrific principals. And we had often some very difficult situations, but the principals in general made a huge difference. One year I had a principal tell me, next year you should switch schools, because the classroom teacher this coming year is not going to be a good fit. And because of seniority issues, that teacher was going to be there. So if you can respect the confidentiality with what the principal tells you, in other words, there are things that the principal may tell you as a parent that you can't say to anybody else. Otherwise, you're never going to get that source of information again. But it's important, you know, and it's the same thing with the classroom teacher or the teaching assistant. They may tell you things that you need to know as a parent that you then can't reveal to anybody else. Because they're very much, we all are in our jobs, you know, have limitations placed on us by our job descriptions and who we report to and the policy. So listening to people and being respectful of them and what they tell you is important. So, you know, in terms of the role of the teacher designs and supervises, assesses the educational of the program for the child, and evaluates. And these are all set out in the School Act. Now, if you have a child with special needs who also has access to some hours of a teaching assistant or special education assistant, it's confusing for parents because most of the time the person who's working with their child is the special education assistant. But if you look at this resource called Roles and Responsibilities of Teachers and Teaching Assistants, which is published by the BC Teachers Federation and CUPE, which is a union for teaching assistants, it kind of tries to describe what the relationship is between them. So the role of the teaching assistant is to work under the supervision of the teacher, the administrator, and to perform, you know, the functions that they're told to for that child. And they assist in the collection of data, but they're not supposed to be your child's teacher. There's only one teacher in the classroom. Unfortunately, sometimes with all the demands on the teacher, they have very little time to spend with the child with special needs, and the special education assistant frequently is more informed about the particular disability the child has. This is a conflict and contradiction within the system. And with collaboration and respect all around, it works. But sometimes it's difficult. And so families need to understand that they really do have to talk to the teacher, include the teacher, be respectful of the teacher, and that will be helpful for their child. And if the teacher isn't interested and leaves that completely to the teaching assistant, then you have to think about still including the teacher on emails and whatever so that they at least can keep an eye on the situation, right? Again, I want you to think always in terms of personalities because we're dealing with human beings. And if you're not respectful of the people that you work with in the school system on behalf of your child, they're unlikely to respect you either. So you need to get to know, some of the things you do in everyday life is that you are always thinking about being polite. And that is, it's polite to use the correct spelling of somebody's name. Be careful about being disrespectful of somebody. I learned this in grade 7 when I said to a fellow student that I thought the librarian was a really difficult person and I really didn't like her. And he said, yes, but it's my mother. So I, would, particularly as people don't, when they get married, they don't take their husband's names all the time, that you be careful of that. You just don't know what relationships are. And again, individuals change in terms of their philosophy, or different in terms of their philosophy, their communication style, their previous job, what they're bringing to the table. Try and find someone's strengths, right? So if a teacher that you have this year for your son or daughter is really very athletic, is a coach, maybe it's something you talk to them about. Could we get the Canucks Autism Network in to do some training in the school district? Would you be interested in this online video that ACT has all about recreation supports? And this was actually done by the Canucks Autism Network. And how can we make things better? So you think, play to the strength of the teacher. The teacher's a reading specialist. Well, gosh, I'm so pleased that you're my son's teacher this year because, this is an area of concern for me. How can you advise, right? So don't expect every teacher to be good at everything. No one is. But to figure out what people's strengths are and to try and work with them. And also to always bring resources. So before you begin your advocacy issues, you're kind of figuring here's an issue here I'm going to have to deal with. So think about who's involved, probably more people than you could ever believe is possible. Who can help, who might help, who definitely won't help. The behind the scenes people, the receptionist in the school district office, the person you have, when is the best time do you think I'm going to be able to get through by telephone to so-and-so, right? My mother was a medical receptionist. I learned that you never mess with the receptionist. Who's going to bend the rules? Who's going to say to you, here's the policy, but you could ask for an exception to policy, right? Because our kids are exceptional. If policy worked perfectly for all children, then probably they wouldn't have a special need anyway. So asking for the exception to policy, and how sometimes people, if you say to them, this isn't acceptable, I don't want to agree to this, can you help me, how should I'd like to, I've had principals say to me, I can't do anything about this. And I said, well, I can't accept it. And they say, well, here's who you need to talk to. And I would say, what exactly should I ask for? What's the wording I should use? What are the right buttons to push? And that's when someone is your ally, right? They don't have the power. So it's pointless to say, what a rotten person you are because you're not making this happen. They don't have the power. Who has the power? Who has the authority? Who can make an exception to the policy?